Grand Archive TCG just changed a core rule of the game, and we've had a chance to play with the new rules quite a bit. So in this video, I'm going to explain what this rule change is, what this rule change isn't, as well as talk about some of the interactions that now are possible because of this rule change and my general opinions on it. So let's jump right into it. What's up everyone, it's Dan with Main Deck and welcome back to another Grand Archive TCG video. In this one, it's just a quick update because, well, this is information that you can't afford to miss. The rules of Grand Archive have changed. Now, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves here. I would say it's a minor change, but it's also an impactful change in the grand scheme of things, and that is this start of game rule change. Now, this was announced in the developer stream ahead of the release of Phantom Monarchs, and this is going to be effective with the release of Phantom Monarchs on December 5th, 2025. And, well, in this video, like I said in the intro, we have had a chance to play with the rule change a good number of games now, and I have some thoughts. We've been theory crafting about what this can mean. So let's jump in. Let's talk about what this rule change is. I want to clarify what this rule change is not. And then we're going to talk about some really cool cards that are going to be, they're going to be a little bit different now with this new rule change, and I think for the better. So the start of game rule change, this is going to be a change to how you put your spirits out and when you put your spirits out. And that's kind of it. It's when you're on enter for your spirit is going to resolve and what that means for you. So previously, on your first turn of the game, you would put out your spirit, draw your 7 cards, and then play your first turn of the game from there. With the new rule change now, at the start of game, both players put their spirit out at the same time. The player who is going first is going to resolve their on-enter ability from their spirit, and then the player who goes second resolves their on-enter ability. No player gains opportunity, which means you can't play fast speed cards or anything until those on-enter abilities have resolved. And then the turn player will begin their first turn of the game, in which, even though the opponent has a spirit out now, they cannot declare attacks. Now, the big question a lot of people had was, how does this affect the second player? Do they get they get to recollect, they get to materialize, do they get to do all this stuff? And no, ultimately, what this change is doing is just pushing your, what you would have done at the beginning of your first turn of the game, if you're going second, to the same time as your opponent, but you still skip your materialize, you still skip your recollect, and you do still get to draw a card going second on your first turn of the game as well. So really, the impact of this rule change is just to push ahead those elements and allow the player going second to not only get to see their hand for a little bit while the player going first is taking their first turn, but also have the ability to potentially interact or do things on that first turn if it would be beneficial. Now, we just got out of a metagame where Rile the Abyss, before it got banned, was everywhere, and man, players were wishing that they had the ability to interact with the opponent's Rile the Abyss on the first turn of the game with a sort of a negation card or something maybe, or a way to at fast speed banish a card. And yeah, I mean, that would have been really nice. And I do kind of wonder if Rile the Abyss would have gotten banned if this rule change were in effect. I still think it would have, probably, because we have entered a very nice, very open metagame that's been very fun to play. But this is a nice rule change in just allowing decks to interact a little bit more. I think one thing that we are losing with this is a little bit of elegance in the game. I do think some number of players really appreciated how elegant it was to say, well, I am going to materialize my spirit, I'm going to play an ally, but I can't attack yet because my opponent doesn't have a spirit in play, it doesn't have something to target. Now we do kind of have this arbitrary thing that a lot of games have, which is, well, the player taking the first turn of the game can't declare attacks. That's now a rule in the game because it has to be, because your opponent has a spirit now. And if it wasn't that way, then your hasty messengers would be going crazy and everything. I think it would be pretty beneficial to be going first for sure. However, there are still going to be some things that are beneficial now when you're going first, as well as just giving the player going second a chance to interact with things. And you don't have this kind of sacred, uninteractable turn when you're taking the first turn of the game. And overall, I think we're sacrificing a little bit of that elegance for a little bit more balance, a little bit more interaction. And as the screen here says, also trying to save a little bit of time, because now taking the second turn of the game, you can kind of have your turn plotted out going into that, which is going to shave off a crucial minute or so that you might need to not reach overtime or something, which, I mean, that's nice too. That's nice too. Just again, to clarify, I just wanted to make sure this is really clear. So on the screen here, I have what this is and what this is not. And again, this is just shifting the second player's spirit, not materialization, but putting their spirit into play and drawing 7 cards to the first turn of the game. But this is not giving them an extra materialize. This is not giving them the ability to recollect. So if they play something on the opponent's first turn of the game, they don't get those cards back going to their second turn. They're basically saying, I'm going to use my first set of actions in this game to interact with you instead of doing something else on my turn. So they're not gaining extra actions, and the turn player who's going first does not get free attacks at the opponent because you cannot attack. So I hope that this screen kind of makes it clear as to what you can and cannot do in this rule change. Ultimately, this should feel like sort of it is a minor rule change, but I think there's a number of interactions that I'm going to go into right now that are going to be pretty cool in the game now that we have this rule change. So the very first thing we're going to mention, we did see this spoiled in the developer stream as well, is that Gentle Respite is now a card in one of the upcoming Recollection decks, the Merlin, Assassin Merlin Recollection deck. We have Gentle Respite in here, and note that we have not seen any Idle Thoughts being shown off, which has been a staple in these Recollection decks up until now. And I think Gentle Respite is replacing it. And I really love this because when you were going first, getting to use Gentle Respite with the opponent now having an influence of 7 because they have drawn their 7 cards is going to give a lot of opponents a really tough choice to make, or maybe no choice to make, because you'll play Gentle Respite, your influence will now be 6 less than their 7, and unless they can play a card that does not draw them anything, so like a Creative Shock will not do the trick here, right? They have to play a card that just brings their influence down on your turn at fast speed, then you're going to get to draw into memory, and you're going to get this float set up going into your second turn of the game, which is honestly like really strong. Gentle Respite has already been a good card, but it's been a little more narrow, right, as to for which decks want to do it. Typically decks that are looking like Wind Arasana is famous for having played this card a fair amount. Decks that are looking to level, looking to get that value, but don't have a fire or water value engine. Now I think Gentle Respite can kind of make it into more decks, and I think that's pretty cool because I like this card. I think this card is really good, and I think it feels really good to play. And it's one of these cards where it does like technically kind of like +1 you when you play it, when you do get that influence, but it sort of feels fair because it's always bringing you from a lower influence up to kind of catch up to your opponent. And so I think this is going to give some first turn players some pretty powerful lines. I'm excited to see what kind of decks will want to fit it in now when it's so much better on the play like that. It's not the only card that is going to get to +1 you on the play, though. We got to talk about Gloamspire Black Market, a card back from Alchemical Revolution. It's got fringe play here or there. It's definitely a card that has seen play. Definitely a callback to like Worlds 2024 when we had the Gloamspire Rye decks that were showing up and dropping Gloamspire just to get to draw into memory as they continue to level and keep their influence low. One issue with Gloamspire was that you couldn't really play and use it on the first turn without giving your opponent free influence, because it's each player with influence less than 7 draws a card in the memory, and your opponent hadn't had a spirit out, so they definitely had influence less than 7. Now you can play Gloamspire on your first turn of the game. The opponent has 7 cards in hand. Same thing as Gentle Respite, unless they're going to commit something to the board, which a lot of decks just can't, like go down and influence at fast speed like that necessarily. I mean, maybe, if they have like a fast cure or something and want to just, okay, I'll just take the float for this and draw a card. That's a gamble you're going to take, but you're going to get to play this out here and go, sure, I will rest this. I will get a card into memory because I'm down to 6 influence. And you will get one if you can play something right now to go down in influence. And so you won't always give them an influence now. Now, some decks will get it, some decks won't. And I think that makes Gloamspire a little bit more playable. Now, will this bring Gloamspire back to being a meta pick for level 3 fire decks? I'm not sure. Again, we don't have Rile of the Abyss, so kind of anything's game, and I'm excited to see if people start to build with this a little bit more. It was also mentioned in the stream, so we have to talk about this with Fire especially, that there are a small number of cards that can deal damage to your opponent's champion at slow speed. Those were previously unusable on your first turn of the game, but cards like Surging Bolt are now usable on your first turn of the game. I think this is ultimately like a pretty minor change because Surging Bolt has not really been played as much. It's been a little bit more of a fringe card in Fire aggro decks, and we have lots of fast speed cards like Demolition, like Vermilion Decree. These decks are usually much happier to run and use them in their Recollection phase in the next turn, but hey, this is an option now, and you know, that's pretty cool. That's a nice buff to Fire aggro decks also. Now let's talk a little bit about interaction, right? Because right now in the current metagame, we definitely see water decks are still very low, and a lot of people are happy about that because we did just get out of a crazy water meta a set ago. Fractals and Genbus were like thought of as the best decks in the format, and before that, just the water mill meta. Like, people are okay having a little break from water, but I think in general, water does get one of the biggest buffs from this change. Just simply, cards like Frostbind now are really nice because you don't have that sacred first turn where your opponent can't interact with anything you do, and just the threat of water having a Frostbind, even if it's not in hand, even if you're not running it, just the threat of having a Frostbind is going to mean that they can't put their whole hand down unless they are willing to lose the last card that they play. And sometimes that will still be the case, and sometimes they won't have the Frostbind and everything, but it is still nice. It's just nice to have that interaction. It means the opponent can't just go all in on gaining value. You know, I've definitely been the play the Windmill Engineer, now play the Reclaim right now before you have the chance to interact with me. That is not as easy a line to pull off all the time now because there are going to be potential things that can negate it. And obviously, like, Frostbind is kind of like the go-to. But one card I really want to shout out is Frozen Dismissal in here. This card that says, hey, if you're going to try and do something as like a Fire aggro deck, like play an Arthur on turn 1 that I absolutely do not want to exist because you're going to make it immortal because it can't attack anyway, Frozen Dismissal can come down and say, actually, it's negated because you do not have the influence to pay for the 4. It's banished. It's negated. I'm really going to slow down the aggro line by having access to this card on the first turn of the game. I think that's really strong. I think that is something that water decks are going to be able to leverage now to maybe get a little bit more advantage in certain matchup spreads in the metagame. So I think that's really, really great to have. And another negation card that I'm really looking at right now that I think is really good is Acquiescing Rejection. I've liked this card for a long time, and we advocated during the Rile of the Abyss metagame to play this card as a way to stop those turn 2 Rile of the Abyss, or your opponent trying to Rile the Abyss at the end of your turn or something. Man, again, like, if Rile was still legal, now your opponent has no safe turn to play a card like Rile, but even cards like Creative Shock or like Windmill Engineer. If your opponent is going for a Windmill Engineer line as a win deck, and you go, okay, Acquiescing Rejection you can either do your Windmill Engineer line, draw into memory, reclaim it, whatever, but you give me a +1 card, or you can end that whole thing and we'll just negate it and banish it. And a lot of players are going to choose to give you the draw 2 to basically +1 you in order to get their Windmill Reclaim lines, Windmill Ace, well, not Ace in turn 1, but get all of their stuff going so that the win deck can get their value engine. If your opponent does anything turn 1, right, to try and have any sort of value engine, Acquiescing basically just says, cool, I'm just going to take my first turn of the game to draw a card. And remember, you're not going to recollect after this, right? So that's going to cost you a lot of cards, but after you draw those 2, you still are able to do things like play a Fractal of Rain or something on your first turn. You're not out of options by a long shot, right? You can hold up a Fractal of Rain and a water card, and you're going to draw 2, and as long as you don't draw no water cards on those plus your draw for turn, then you're still going to get to kind of do what you wanted to do, play your Fractal of Rain, and I mean, potentially still even hold up interaction on your opponent's next turn. It's a really, really strong line. Honestly, it's something that I think decks are going to want to look at. I really, really like that. And of course, it was talked about in the stream, and you guys know I'm a big Tristan fan, but like Incapacitate, right? This was the card. If Rile of the Abyss is still legal, They play Ryle, you incap it, you move on with your day. I don't care that we don't have class bonus. It doesn't matter. You're happy to pay 4 to incap the Ryle. Stop them from pitching the liminal guides. Force them to play really bad lines with liminals or have a second Ryle or something. You always are going to feel, I think, okay about that. Let alone if we start with this new Merlin deck playing incap and Frostbind in the same deck. You can go incap. Now, you can't Frostbind on your opponent's first turn of the game after that, but then you're going to get to draw a card and hold up Frostbind going in their next turn, maybe potentially slow them down a little bit. It's pretty cool. I think I like this a lot. I am happy. There's going to be certain things I'm going to be happy to incap on the first turn of the game, or at least just the threat of it is going to stop the opponent from going quite as crazy with their plays. Now, I don't want to leave wind out of this either. And I think there's something that people haven't talked about a lot that's really big, but prior to this rule change, outside of some very, very weird niche scenarios where your opponent makes you draw cards on their first turn of the game, it was not possible to do something like play a Fairy Whispers or play a 3 Visits before you draw your card as the second player of the game, as the second turn player of the game. Now you do have the ability to do that. And even outside of Wind, cards like Reckoning's Wake are pretty cool. Your pregame action is going to be to put out that Looking Glass, so it will be in play and you'll have 7 cards in hand. So you can actually now go on your opponent's turn, Reckoning's Wake, to set up the top cards of your deck so that maybe you can draw a more effective card to get you a stronger first turn of the game after that. And that's not bad. That's actually a pretty cool line. It is risking the floating memory a little bit because, you know, you're doing it in the same way that you would have done it main phase, but you do get to immediately draw that card off of it, which might give you an acceleration depending on what your deck looks like. Fairy Whispers, obviously putting less cards down, which is nice to do that. 3 Visits puts no cards down, just is going to mean you're going to have a 7 cards play on your next turn. You're not going to have 8, you're going to have 7 because you use that 3 Visits and your champion's going to be rested, and the Recover 2 might not have done anything, right? But maybe that glimpsing is going to be important to try and set up a better first draw of the game, which is interesting at the very least. It's a thing that Wind can kind of do more than other elements outside of Reckoning's Wake plays, and I think that's going to be cool. The other thing Wind can do that I really like is we've seen Wind Seiryu decks be pretty popular right now. Wind has Expeditious Opening, and Expeditious Opening is a funny card that can do a lot of kind of funny things, and one of them that I really like is the opponent is playing Seiryu and they go for the Beseeched Fate Stone. They put their whole hand down to try and materialize something to level up to Guoja 1, often is the play, or maybe put out something like Censor, depending, but obviously when they see your Spirit of Wind now, they're probably not going to necessarily just jump to a Censor. But instead, they're going to try to put a Guoja level 1, and you can go Expeditious Opening on your first turn of the game to play like an Eternal Magistrate imbued. And now that Beseeched Fate Stone is not going to materialize anything, or maybe they even went for a Beseech the Winds. Maybe that's coming back a little bit when we get the Return of Purifying Thurible or something. Getting that Magistrate down at fast speed can maybe like blow them out a little bit, right? Which is like, that's pretty cool too. There's a host of other allies you might be able to Expeditious Opening into play on your opponent's first turn of the game. Definitely encourage people to go explore what other options are available to them to kind of try and disrupt your opponent's first turn of the game. But that's really what this change is all about, right? It's about creating a first turn of the game where the turn player actually has a few more interesting lines in order to potentially gain advantage or push some damage. But then the player taking the second turn has a bunch of lines to try and interact with the opponent as well. And that's kind of fun. That's kind of interesting. In our experience so far, it has been a change that has gone from either being pretty negligible, other than kind of knowing what your turn is, to just being fairly interesting in how the two players interact. It is a loss of elegance, a slight one, but I think it's a gain in fun, interactivity, and it's going to open the door for more interesting designs that are going to be more interactive and fewer potential for like those really early victories where an opponent just gains an insurmountable advantage from having an uninteractable turn 1. And so overall, I think this change is for the best. I really like it, but I'd like to hear from you all. What do you think about Grand Archive's new rule change? How is it going to impact the game? What do you think of any of these cards I talked about today? What's your favorite thing that you're looking forward to doing with the new rule change? Or did I tell you one that you didn't quite think of yet? Let me know in the comments down below. Love to start another discussion with you guys. The discussions in our comments are sometimes some of the most enlightening to me, and I love hearing what you all think. So let me know down there. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want more weekly Grand Archive content, and we'll see you all in the next one.